All right. Welcome, everybody, to a historic occasion. This is the first ever SBSM men's panel. And, honestly, it's probably because it's taken this long to get enough men interested in doing this work and to go through the program to have a cohort big enough. So I'm really, really grateful to all of you for showing up here to share your experiences and talk about SBSM and where you were before and what it's been like for you to engage in this work and any changes that you may have noticed. We may have, I don't know how many people will show up to watch, but hopefully we'll get quite a few, and we may get some questions appearing in the chat. They may be directed to one of you after you share your story, and feel free to answer those directly if you like. Also, you don't have to. And just one final note, just to, please keep yourself muted until I call on you, just so we don't get any random background noise. And with that, I think we can probably get going. So welcome all. I just have a list of the people who are here, so I'm just going to call on you in the order that I have written down here. It's no particular order of importance, just to clarify. But yeah, really grateful for you all to be here. SBSM and this work in general, somatic trauma healing, is something that is universal. I mean, it's something that we all need as humanity. I think most of you would probably agree at this point, having dove into it. And for some reason, it seems to be that historically, people who identify as women are much more interested in improving themselves and healing. And I think, a lot of that, if I think about myself, maybe trace back to the kind of programming we get as men. It was like, feelings, introspection, sensitivity, all that stuff. We're supposed to be tough and capable and all that stuff, all those old stories. So it's really inspiring to me to see you here. And just thank you once again. So without any further ado, I'm just going to start at the top of my list here with Job. If you could unmute yourself. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
So where are you joining us from?
I'm joining from Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
All right. All right.
Uh,
So just to start, maybe just give us a little history of, what was going on for you and what drew you to SBSM.
sure, I will try to do my best and give a concise description of what have happened. Basically, I think I was 12 or 13 or there around, and yeah, at some point during the night, I just woke up, with just a dreaded panic attack, intrusive thoughts, and
Hmm.
and basically I just didn't know what was happening to me. And at that time, there wasn't this big internet where you can, basically look for symptoms that you had and, sort of like surmise what the problems were that you might have. Of course, and you didn't have all the YouTube videos of, Irene you can find nowadays. So, it felt a little bit like, there was, something wrong with me. And at that point, I just didn't know what the predicament was I was in.
Wow. So that awareness started way back when you were a teenager.
Yeah, definitely. At some at some point I found out that it had to do with the fact that it was just really unsafe
Yeah.
at home, and at some point basically my body just gave in, and the way in which it showed was showing these panic attacks.
Yeah.
Uh, And the thing was that at some point it just became worse, and anxiety and panic attacks and depression became sort of like my nemesis.
Hmm.
And I always had a feeling there was at the bedrock level there was something just wrong with me, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Just like I wasn't in tune with life,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I really tried to find as much information as possible. But it was
Yeah.
just like it wasn't possible for me to find what I was looking for, and even a lot of soul searching and psychotherapy and medication and so on just didn't help, and only gave me the feeling that I was scratching the surface.
Wow. So when
Uh,
did you discover this work?
Uh, I I think I was 35 or there around that I sort of like found several modalities among which breathwork, Wim Hof, and those
Yeah.
kinds of things that I got to know about the nervous system. But yeah, really in a just surface level. But from that moment on, I sort of like learned how to regulate my nervous system, but in a really biohacking kind of way. So it felt like that I had sort of like a really general feeling of how I could learn to regulate myself. Yeah, but still,
Yeah.
I felt at the mercy of the whims of my nervous system and the survival stress that was coming to the surface quite often.
Yes, you're having to bring in these big tools to sort of manage and cope.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I think that's pretty common. I think a lot of people discover that stuff first because it is sort of surface level and more popular, right? So when you discovered SBSM and you started learning more of the deep knowledge, and
hmm
what kind of difference did that make for you?
The thing is, I really started out not so much with SBFM, but really binge watching all the free resources that I really
Ah,
have on YouTube.
yeah.
And from then on, I started learning, using the 21
Ah,
days tune up.
great.
And from that moment on, I dived into SBSM. And what it really helped me with, it sounds a little bit simple, but what the point that Irene drives home really often is that, learning about the nervous system and becoming knowledgeable in that regard really helps. And at some point, I understood that, once you understand the way the nervous system works, you get a little bit of a feeling of having control over your body, because some things that happen to your body, you sort of like start recognizing what is happening. And that for me was yeah quite of a big breakthrough, combined
Yeah.
with the various neurosensory exercises, among which orienting, which has been really a godsend for me.
Ah, absolutely. Yeah, just that ability to connect to the environment, not have to be so internal all the time, right? But then to be able to bridge those two with an understanding, like a refined understanding, like you say, of what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When did you start? Is this was this last round your first round of SBSM, or was it a
I'm now going to start with the third round. In this round is going to be my third round.
okay?
And the nice thing of the second round was that, for one, I can remember that I, sort of like had a rough patch at work, because I wanted to sort of like reduce my psych match, which I was using, and that sort of like caused me to spiral a little bit. And I can remember that I, was in a situation in which I, was feeling dread all day,
Mm,
basically. And I
mm,
can remember that when I took half an hour off, I went walking outside, and there's this park bench where I sat down,
mm,
and I started orienting. And at that moment, I grasped the feeling of feeling safety inside of my body. And from that moment on, that it was like in half an hour each day that I felt this sense of safety, and increasingly it grew on me. And now it feels like every time I try to do my best and feel the bench on which I'm sitting or my seat,
mm.
it sort of like returns me to this feeling of safety that was that has really been a big thing in the second round.
Amazing. So that's so good. And you're doing what Irene and I both talk about over and over, which is, integration. Like it's about learning the practices, but then you got to do them like in your life, right? And like you say, giving the system just that half hour to just, oh, here I am, right? It's safe. Oh my goodness. That's so great, man. Ah, well, that's really, really wonderful to hear how you've been able to do that. Is there anything else you'd like to share about just
Yeah,
what's going
another
on for you?
another big thing is, of course, I also had the feeling that trauma was this elusive thing,
Mm,
that with which nothing, no modality could really help. Stuff like EMDR, that it, just, whatever I, set out to do, and learned, whatever therapy, it just scratched the surface, and it, didn't really help. And this SBSM and this nervous system work was the first thing that really gave me the feeling like, yeah, this is actually something that's helping. That's,
Amazing.
yeah, that's one big thing. And the other thing is that I always had this feeling that I'm, yeah, quite introverted. And when I was in the pits of depression, at some point I didn't talk for several weeks. And also that has transformed, yeah, quite significantly, because now I really notice that, this ventral vagal part is, yeah, becoming more dominant into such a point that I really like to listen to quite isolationist music as a sort of like escapism.
Yeah.
And now I really have this sense of, yeah, wanting to listen to people, listen to podcasts, and really enjoy engaging in conversations with people. And that's, yeah, something really new for me. And it's, yeah, for me it felt like, yeah, that I'm really changing at the surface level in, yeah, depths that I, yeah, couldn't have foreseen in the beginning.
Wow, amazing. I certainly can relate to that, man. Like, you talk about isolation, you know, probably my story, and like, yeah, spending essentially 15 years in the woods to minimize that contact. And man, yeah, that's so wonderful to hear. And it just, again, it's a really beautiful, practical, everyday way in which it shows that deep change is really happening for you, being able to find safety with other people. It's beautiful, man. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Job. I really appreciate you being here.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, thanks, man. All right, great stuff. Great stuff. Next down, I have Mitch.
Hey, Seth. Thanks
Hey,
for having
Mitch. All right, where are you joining us from?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. Awesome. That's near where my grandparents were. Kind of. Yeah. Yeah.
Right
Uh,
on. Awesome.
right on. So, how are you doing?
Dude, I'm good, man. The program's been amazing. I started with 21 day and I'm on week 7 of the SmartBody SmartMind. This is my first round.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you are someone who's found a way to make it your own pace. If you're working through it outside of the live session, and yeah.
Yeah, I got that message early on. It's like I've done a lot of programs similar to Job, Wim Hof, retreats, immersive experiences, masterminds, whatever, and nothing really worked, or I never really felt anything. And it's like doing the nervous system reset. The first 3 days, the 21 day, I went 3 days. I plowed through like I would have in the past, and it's like I couldn't sleep one night. Like it hit my nervous system so hard, and so I learned, I mean, that for me, that was exciting. That let me know that something was working. And
Yeah.
from there, I learned how to titrate, learned how to go up my speed. And I went 6 months for the first 21 days.
Awesome. Awesome. And that's something that anyone here watching who hasn't done any of this work, you'll hear Irene and I say over and over again, the first thing is learning what your pace is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
changed over time too. Like now I definitely have more capacity. I can handle a lot more. I do a lot of the neurosensory exercises on a daily basis, where in the past, like I remember tiptoeing in and, I would listen to a video for 10 seconds and it would hit a chord and I would
Yep.
just pause and I would process that. Like my process was listen until I felt something, write that down, like maybe do some journaling around that, maybe do some tapping and things like that to help me process like what's coming up, what's going on. And then what I didn't feel like I had gotten myself, I would go talk to my therapist and we would work through those things together. So it paved the way for how I've done therapy as well.
Oh, that's amazing. So sounds like, yeah, you were able to have a therapist that was also at least informed enough about this work to be supportive. And were they an SE practitioner, may I ask, or?
I just started working with an SE practitioner like last week. Wow. Yeah, I've done, yeah, like I said, I did the courses. I've worked with a trauma specialist and then just started doing the one-on-one work.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And have you found it's been really effective to have both the online material and one-on-one work, like working together?
Man, for me, I like to go deep. I like to understand. I'm a health coach myself. And when I find something like this that really works, I want to share it with people. So, yeah, I was reading books, podcasts. I mean, to me, like the whole mental health genre, if you will, was completely something that I was not aware of. I was into like subconscious work and what I would call mindset. But this was just a completely different level. So I love the science. I loved understanding the biology and the physiology and how things worked. And that just made it easier for when things started happening. Like instead of being afraid, which was my go-to in the past, I would be like I remember remembering some stuff from childhood, like toxic shame and getting that disgust and telling my wife about it, and then going and throwing up in the toilet and being like, this is awesome. This is great. And she's like, what's going on? I'm like, don't worry. I'll tell you in a minute. It's going to be great.
That's so great. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the processing, since we are working at a physiological level, it can be physiological. Like, yeah, when you're processing disgust, that's not unusual for that to happen sometimes. And yeah, it's just getting out those deep imprints, man. Really
For sure.
great. Really great.
Absolutely.
Anything else that's shifted for you, like sort of before you found this work and after? Have you
Oh,
noticed
yeah.
any sort of symptom changes or?
I mean, I was like the mystery illness dude that like felt too much, right? So I have a list here. It's kind of crazy. TBI. Then I fell out of a second story window in Amsterdam.
Oh,
Uh, Anxiety, panic attacks, insomnia. After that, I moved into a moldy home. I developed Lyme disease. I had heavy metals. I was diabetic and metabolic issues, so fatty liver. I was in corporate sales. I think that's a disease sometimes. Um, then I had a car accident. I had long haul COVID 3 times. And it's
oh,
like I kept getting pounded. I kept getting attracting head injuries, which I've learned is kind of typical with trauma. And when I got into this work, I had no idea about the childhood stuff.
mm,
I remember when my functional medicine doctor goes like, "Hey, let's talk about your childhood trauma," and I'm like, "How dare you? I had an amazing childhood, and my parents are great. I love them, but there was just things that shaped who I am today, and through the practice, I mean, I started exercising again for the first time in 4 years. I got off a thyroid medication. I wasn't able to sleep in the same bed as my wife because I was just like waking up all night long. We've been sleeping together. That's been amazing. I'm
oh,
traveling again. I'm back in my business. I got my life back, dude. I mean, I can't thank you guys enough. It's been life changing.
man. I'm so happy to hear. And it comes from putting in the work, man. And so like, yeah, we are here to be a catalyst and to give you the information, to give you the practices, but you got to do the work. And it sounds like you've really been rocking it, man. You've been going for it.
Oh yeah, I'm all in, man. I love it.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Mitch and Sharon. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, just a wonderful story there, and just an example of how many things can shift. It can be really mysterious when we don't yet understand the intricacies of the autonomic nervous system and the way it touches everything, and how things like not being able to sleep through the night and Lyme, and chronic sensitivity and panic attacks, how all these things can actually be all under the same umbrella. It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. All right. So I will go down my list here. Harvey Stone, hello.
Hello.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Sure. Thanks for offering it.
So just yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. What was happening for you and how'd you find this work and how's it been going?
Well, over the years, I've done a lot of different kinds of work and led a lot of different. For years, I led personal growth workshops, for instance, that really didn't touch very deep. They were great about communications and relationships, but never really got much deeper than that. And when I started to really look back at my life, I was born near the end of World War II.
Hmm.
My parents were Jewish. I was raised Jewish. My mother was an immigrant who had come from the Ukraine.
Hmm.
And as I started to look back what their life was like, which they never really talked about, was what it must have been like for them to go through the Depression, go through the war, particularly for my mother having come from a country that would periodically come in and either steal the lands or kill the Jews who lived in the areas. What that must have been like, and to be frightened. I can imagine the amount of, as the headlines started to come in and the news stories started to come in about what was happening in Germany, that how they managed to handle that, as I look back on it, is that was keep your head down, don't cause any trouble or any waves, because the risks to what might happen are so great, and some of which they had personally known, that got translated in how they raised me as an only child living in a small apartment it was mostly a Jewish community, but not enough Catholics and Protestants outside of Boston. That the energy in which I grew up, while my parents were very loving people, the energy was really a very dead energy that came out of their own adaptations and having to basically somehow adjust to the world as they knew it then and the risks that they felt. And to live that way for 18 years in that house as an only child, as I now understand it, created a tremendous freeze in me, that they were very loving, but they didn't really know how to raise me or
Right.
raise a child, and they were older, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So my life has been a lot of trying this, trying that, let's do this, let's do that, to really figure it out. When I went to college, I went in as a psychology major, came out as a psychology major, hoping that on page 68, I'd see the description of myself, and on page 69 would be the solution to myself, right? Which
Right.
didn't quite do it that way.
Right.
So as I've really tried to work with this over the years, right, where SBSM came in was really helpful to me, right, was to really understand the biology of the stress, the biology of the freeze,
Yeah.
how that kind of trauma got stored in my body, which rarely played itself out physically. It mostly played itself out in a kind of contraction of my own energy, my own life force, which
Wow.
impacted my relationship, impacted my work in many ways, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time that I first came upon the program, I was also beginning to experiment for the first time in 30, 40 years, because I was a child of the 60s, with psychedelics and plant medicines.
Mm.
And what I learned through the program really helped me to use those plant medicines in a far deeper way than I ever had before, because I now trusted that so much had gotten frozen, so much had gotten trapped in my body. And if I could use the plant medicines and other talk therapy as well in ways to get me down deeper, I could begin to re-experience some of the shame, some of the guilt, some of the deadness of the energy that had plagued me all the years. So that for me was really the value in the program, the most value. And there's the phrase need to know. I needed to know that information
Yeah.
before I could somehow go deeper in the ways that I have. And one of the things I really liked about the program is, to me, it delivered what it promised, in that it delivered the kinds of information and in a way and with the repetition and over time that it takes for that kind of information and new information to really sink in.
Yeah.
And then to be able for me to then take it, I got it deep enough to then take it and run with it in other ways that have been very, very helpful to me in the last couple of years.
Fantastic, man. What a wonderful story. I mean, deep story. And what you're describing is something we see a lot with intergenerational trauma, essentially, is what you're talking about, where, the experience of the parents get transmitted. Even though, like you say, like your parents loved you. And I think that's the case with a lot of us. I'm sure there's people who experienced outright abuse as well. We know there are, but there's also a lot of us who just had that misattunement and that passing on of the parents' stress and their adaptations. And
Yes, that's
yeah,
right.
I love the way you describe freeze as a contraction and a deadening of the life force. That is such a beautiful description, very evocative. It's because it's not obvious like sympathetic arousal is, like you say, which sympathetic arousal is much more in the body, more obviously physical sometimes, whereas the freeze is much more,
Yeah.
yeah, like the subtle thing.
Harder to see, hidden in
Harder
plain.
to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like the fish that doesn't know it's in water. It's like,
Yeah. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, man. And
Yeah.
how beautiful that you've been able to, do your psychology and get the benefit from that and the benefit from the plant medicines, and now bringing it all together with this knowledge of your physiology in a deeper way. That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome to hear. Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you.
Appreciate you sharing. Awesome. Okay. David. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Yeah. This is so cool. Be here with the guys.
Yeah. This is definitely a different feel to it. I like it.
Yeah, very much so. So I, of course, know David and I know each other a bit, and I know some of your story. But how would you describe your journey with this work? And I know it's a long one.
It's funny, hey? It's how do you describe this work? It's just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's been great. I don't know how do you describe it. It's kind of at times it's a bit of a nightmare to be honest, but
Yeah.
it's one of those necessary things that I think only the brave and the committed actually step upon the pathway. So I'll toot my own horn to say I have been courageous in walking this path, and congrats to all the men here who have done the same.
Absolutely.
Um, But I've been, I think I did this. I was thinking, sitting here because you asked the question, when did this work start for the others? I'm thinking, I think it was the fall of 2017 when it
Mhm.
was called the New Inner Game. I think that's what me and Irene had talked about. Um, but it keeps adding. It's one of those
Yeah.
things that kind of keeps adding layers, right? Like for example, I am finally now committed to a disciplined and regular exercise regime for myself, and it's fantastic. And not in a beating up, no pain, no gain, beating up the body kind of way, but in a really honoring kind of way, which has just been great. Um, Another thing would be I'm thinking about looking back, and certainly stuff comes up from childhood that I've had to sort of process and deal with because it's just ongoing, right? Both
Yeah.
my parents are still alive. There's still a bit of chaos in my family system. So there's how am I navigating that? And even that's different. Do I get completely not triggered? No, I get triggered still, but I bounce back from that quicker, and I'm able to communicate boundaries and uphold boundaries in a much more sustainable way than I used to be, which has
Mm.
been very, very in being raised with what the hell's a boundary
Yeah.
territory, to learn what a boundary is, how to communicate a boundary, and how to uphold those boundaries, has been very, very important. And the nervous system resiliency and capacity and regulation is just pivotal to that. You can't have a defense if there are literally no defenses.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
that's an important one. And now I'm moving into, I think was it might have been Job that talked about getting out and having conversations and working on the relational piece. Because I relate to your story. I mean, I moved across country and I'm here out on Vancouver Island in the woods, and the healing aspect of nature has been paramount.
Yeah.
But had I come out here prior to doing this work, would I even have felt the connection to the nature, to the woods that I even feel now?
Mm.
Probably not. Probably not.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's
which is a
that's
big one, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And that's a really good point, that it's when we go know ourselves better, it doesn't just facilitate deeper connection with other people. It's deeper connection with everything.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that aspect, I think I've been able to enjoy and really, really embody what this island offers, or what British Columbia in general offers, because I'm more grounded and settled and regulated, um, and just enjoying it and able to be at peace in these surroundings. And that's now spilling. I'm moving more towards healthy relationships, and that's where I'm at now is the discernment between a healthy person versus unhealthy person, who to trust, who not to trust. Where maybe before I was just oversharing and over needing of attention, I would just let anybody in. Like, oh, this person's giving me attention, I'm just going to bond and attach to them, whatever intention they might have. And now I'm more discerning, which is You know, I guess some people think, oh, that's judgmental. I'm like, yeah, it is. Uh, but it's you know, I guess the fancy word for that they're calling is discernment.
Yeah.
But I'm just discerning who's healthy for my life and who isn't, because we have to have that discernment as we walk through life. And I believe it is the nervous system that guides us through that bit of a minefield. And you know, as you started off, we think all of the human races could benefit and does benefit from this work. So there are people out there that are disruptive, whether subconsciously, unconsciously, or in a more kind of evil kind of conscious way, which so learning how to walk through that and sort of know who to move towards and who to move away from has been really, really pivotal for exploration in the world. So I can now get out and explore the world and have more of a social engagement without feeling so hypervigilant and without having to avoid certain situations. A big part of that right now that I'm doing is I started taking, I'm only like 2 classes in, but I started taking comedy improv classes.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and I must say that it is terrifying. So I get it, because playfulness, I always find in terms of the spectrum, right, of like completely frozen, traumatized on one side, and then the other side, free flow playtime. And I was never really a playful kid. I was just very frozen as a child. Didn't really want to, couldn't play socially all that well. So now I'm like playing with a bunch of silly adults, trying to drop inhibitions and be silly, which is the next layer of really trying to drop inhibitions, but also do so in an honoring way. And it's been a test. It's still a test. And now at the end of 6 weeks, we even have to do a bit of a live stage performance if we wish.
Wow.
So yeah, that's going to be interesting. Um, but that finding that playfulness later in life, after I hadn't really seen that, and again, transgenerational stuff, I hadn't seen that from my father. My father's a very frozen person, you know, British, you know, old school baby boomer British engineer, just really frozen. I've never really seen him be silly. So I figure I can get up and talk. I mean, that's like I can get up and talk and try to sound maybe smart or intellectual or like I know stuff. But to be silly,
Yeah.
that's a whole different thing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So that's my journey. That's kind of where my journey finds me right now, is leaning into the playful silliness, the goofiness, the weird,
Yeah.
in a less inhibited way, and being okay, having to be okay if there's judgment from the outside world
Yeah.
with how I might express. And that's a work in progress. I'm not saying that's certainly, I'm not like totally there yet.
Sure.
But yeah, but I can see the trajectory of where it's headed. And I'm happy and I'm positive about where it's going.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You know, and just hearing your story, especially sort of the latest arc of it, is such a
Mm.
beautiful trajectory and example of what happens when we reclaim our sympathetic energy, right? The stuff that's been in fight flight, and we process that, and then it's available to us. Because it's that very energy that gives us the ability to, one, know that we even need a boundary, much less enforce it, right? And then bringing that into relationships, holding boundaries with family systems, being discerning about who we do and do not engage with. Like all of that speaks to me of that you've really done that good work of channeling that aggression in a really positive way, such that it's able to serve you as life energy. And then it's like, what's the next thing? Being silly. How beautiful. Because then there's this new expression of that life force that's totally novel in your experience. So, I mean, that's really awesome to hear. That's really
Yeah.
awesome to hear, man.
Yeah. And that's a good summary. Thank you for that summary. It's a well framed for sure.
Right on, man. Oh, thanks for being here, David and Sharon. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, Joe. Hello, Joe.
How's it going?
Good. Yes. Happy to be here with y'all.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And I'm coming from a snowy just north of Toronto, Ontario, Canada area here, and I'm hoping my internet stays in because sometimes when the snow's coming down, it'll get a little wonky, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, awesome. It's looking good now.
Good.
Yeah. So I know you've been involved in consciousness exploration for a long time. At what point did the nervous system stuff come in for you?
Yeah, I think really looking at it from the standpoint of like I've played with so much work, like you mentioned, in the healing arts space between consciousness and breath work and all these different pieces to the puzzle, and they're great to a point. And what ended up happening with me is I was going through a very, very difficult period in my business where I literally had very little control over what was going to happen in my business. And so I kind of had to just roll with it. And I was rolling with it while also trying to fix everything at once, and it caused burnout. And the burnout was essentially so bad where I was in a position where I'd be sleeping and I would just shoot up out of bed in complete terror. And this would happen like 2, 3 nights in a week. I was comatose a lot. So, just kind of that complete collapse on the couch, can't get up, no motivation, don't want to do anything. But I'm also trying to run my business at the same time. So you got the gas pedal and the brake pedal on at the same time, and you're kind of moving through all that. And I would think I was doing an interview, and I said at the end of the interview to the person I was chatting with, I said, I think I've become traumatized because of what's happened in my business. And Irene happened to be watching and said, hey, check out this 3-part video series. And I did. And I was like, oh man, and like a light bulb just went off in my head, because as we were talking about the consciousness exploration and all the other modalities, they weren't helping me in this point of burnout. It wasn't working. So I looked at it, and then I think I bought the 21-day right away, and I started to go into it. Similarly to someone else, I took my time with it. I kind of went slowly. I couldn't do it in 21 days because my system was like really reacting to stuff. Like I was at a point in my life where if I went to exercise, the moment I like got my heart rate up a bit, it was like off the charts, and like I was like super anxious, right? So I went slowly with 21 day and really just kind of started to settle my system more and more. And then I think, as a guess, but I think it was around 2021 where I got into SBSM, and that I can say was like depth and nuance was like really the details that just took it deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding the biological part and the physiological part at an even deeper level of playing with, for me, like even playing with the diaphragms, playing with those particular areas was really, really helpful in kind of exploring the interior of your body even more sort of intently. And I think at the end of the day, the biggest sort of takeaways were really learning how to listen on levels that completely change the way you utilize your energy. And specifically, and this is where you mentioned the word reclaiming energy, or sometimes I call it like having an organic release of old stuff, right? Building the awareness through the program of what to do, and when you start to feel something arising, like I don't know if this is normal for people, but my experience has been every certain amount of time I just have this big release of something that happens in like the middle of the day for no reason. There will be like this impulse to just go lay down on the bed or go do something, and you just go and you follow that, and your body takes you through something, whatever it is at that moment. And there's a real fascinating, trackable sort of reclamation of energy that comes out in whatever way it needs to show up. And for me, sometimes it was freeze, having a lot of that unfrozen sort of sensation happening. The complete burnout exhaustion energy has come out through like 8 minutes straight of just yawning. But knowing to listen for that to happen. My latter story was shared on the platform, and that was a fascinating one to be able to sort of track just kind of the shakes of that sympathetic energy of what was going on there. But yeah, it's been a lot of that kind of like moving toward, because I don't think the journey ever ends, but moving toward that mastery, right? Like you're sensing your body and your system on a much deeper level. And I definitely couldn't have done that with the modalities that I knew in the past.
Yeah. The way you highlight listening is so crucial because so much of what we encounter out there in the wild west of the internet trauma healing world is about doing, is about pushing on the system in some way, trying to get something to happen, applying a hack, applying a technique, putting this device on, etc. When really, like you're describing, the deep stuff comes from that inner listening. It's like it's not with the listening with the ears, it's listening with those internal senses. And I just love how you describe how, like, yeah, middle of the day, oh, I don't know what's happening, but I have the impulse to go lay down, and then something happens. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it is sometimes it'll happen in a way that I mean you can't sort of logically describe it because it's the intelligence and the wisdom of the body that you're kind of tuning into and listening and exploring. And I think as in our Western culture and our modern culture, we've very much become left hemisphere focused, and it's kind of created this moment where we're looking for pure framework and pure steps from A to B to C as to what you're supposed to do in every situation. But
Right.
as we know, that's not really gonna be the case. It's sort of like I think David, you were saying, like, how do I explain this work? It's like that's kind of what it is sometimes. You have to create the conditions for you to be able to move through stuff. And I think being able to understand and navigate those like what emerges from those conditions with skill is really what SBSM taught me, is like just creating that space and having the knowledge to then allow things to emerge and you can meet it. Versus, okay, how do I now force this thing out of her? How do I, make this happen? Which is maybe that's the old way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like, this is recent, and this work has only been developed in the last 40, 50 years. So in the realm of, mind body stuff, the body wasn't even part of it for most of the journey of psychology and psychiatry, and the body was not necessarily considered. So it is emergent, and we are, I view you and all of us as pioneers in this inner territory, this inner landscape. So thanks for going on the journey, man, and for sharing
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for allowing me the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And if anyone watching is curious, Joe mentioned a story of falling off a ladder, which is on Irene's YouTube channel and blog. It's a great interview. Yeah. Fantastic. All right. Sean.
Hey, how are y'all doing today?
Hey, good. Thanks for being here.
Of
Where are
course.
you joining us from?
So I'm joining from San Diego,
Okay.
California.
Awesome. Awesome. So yeah, just sort of how you see how it's going. Give us a little bit of your story. What was going on for you, and when did you find this work, and how has it helped you?
Yeah, I was kind of a very ambitious person, kind of powering through life, and I had a couple events that kind of gave me a little reality check, and so I tried, multiple things, cognitive therapies and different things, and I think it helped to some extent, but I was still something wasn't clicking, and I still kind of felt stuck. Um,
Hmm.
So I kind of got into the somatic work. I actually studied some of Peter Levine stuff and
Right.
realized that functional freeze was definitely a big part of what had driven a lot of my ambition. Um, and so I did a lot of processing trauma. The way I kind of do it is very from a very creative place. So I do music and art and storytelling. And so that's kind of
Amazing.
my processing trauma. Um, and I actually found Irene through my vocal coach. So one of my music vocal coaches had a podcast with Irene, and so that was a really cool experience, and it kind of brought everything together and took me into more the somatic route, and
Hmm.
that was super helpful because I think that was the missing piece. I'd done a lot of intellectual processing, but I hadn't done a lot of somatic processing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. Do you find that now that you're learning these more inner pieces, does that connect to your expression? Like, say you're creating a piece of music, or you're singing, or you're creating a piece of art. Are you still sort of feeling the internal stuff too? Are those two like bridging together? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably helps me more. So before I used to kind of put my head down, balls to the wall, just kind of grind through things.
Yeah.
And now I kind of more relax into my insights. So a lot of my insights come from calming myself, getting myself into like a very peaceful state, and then I'll get an insight.
Fantastic, man. Ah, so good. You know, I also am a musician and have a background in that. And I know for me, I used to, my creative process used to be a way of sort of squirreling away from the world and you know, sort of running on a bit of a treadmill kind of, you know, and I've certainly noticed a change in how I create after getting regulated. It feels much more, yeah, calm, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the main things that I took from this class was understanding how my physiology worked.
Mhm.
I had a one level, but I think I took it to a much deeper level through these classes. And
Awesome.
kind of knowing what to expect was super helpful. Like the
Mm,
nervous system is such a weird, it operates in such a weird way. And
yeah.
so knowing to expect it, like, you know what, my body's gonna be stuck, but my mind's gonna be fine. Or the certain weird things that will come up. It was just great to know that that was a normal thing that was happening at the rate.
Really good point, man. I mean, that's one of the things that I say a lot to people is like about this work is it's weird. Like the experiences that'll happen are just strange sometimes. And like you say, it's all actually understandable when we have this knowledge and it's like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. Yeah, that normalization I think is super helpful. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Leendert. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, Leendert.
All
That's me,
right.
also from Amsterdam.
Ah, wonderful. All right. And also a musician, it looks like, with a guitar in the background.
A former musician,
Ah,
filmmaker.
great.
But yeah, I've been writing some stuff down, listening to all of you guys, and yeah, recognizing a lot. I also wrote down, thanks for the idea, David, that I should do improv theater at some point. I think for me that would be like a massive like milestone to rediscover the person I used to be, I think.
Mm.
So like starting a little bit at the end, I'm realizing now that through the work that I've done, the SBSM work, I'm rediscovering more and more the child that I like, the kid that I used to be.
Mm.
I think I was a very like playful kid, very sorry, something's happening on the screen. I was very playful. I was very sociable, I think, but because of the like the family dynamic, I grew up in a very large family with a ton of siblings, with parents who weren't available. They were there, but they weren't really. A lot of abuse, a lot of ridicule. I found myself like developing into a functional freeze, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so what I'm rediscovering now more and more is the sociable part of me and the outgoing part of me and the silly part of me, which is still sometimes very hard, given the fact that I grew up in a family where I already mentioned the word, there was a lot of ridicule, so ridicule and shame. But yeah, yeah, so I'm just very happy to rediscover that side of myself and also see how that's changing the relationships that I have. I think two things that I really struggled with were insomnia and trouble connecting to people, like on a deeper level. Friends, family, but most of all in a romantic, intimate relationship.
Sure.
And which is something, I mean, like it's all men here. I see that so much around me, especially in men, and I think it's also very accepted in the sense that we say and think like that's like a male characteristic to not be very good at connecting to people or to showing your emotions, and
Yeah.
which I think is complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of losing my losing what I was saying, but
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. You know, discovering the ability to connect at a romantic level or an intimate level.
yeah.
That is such a deeply profound echo sometimes of our childhood. Right? That it can feel very charged because it's a primary attachment person. Right? And so if our primary attachment people when we were kids were not safe, learning to find that safety and that intimate, deep connection can be really scary. And it sounds like you were saying that you're starting to find that ability as well as, you know, socially, more casually, but also you're starting to feel the ability to connect in that deeper way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and like some of you already mentioned boundaries, and I feel that it's becoming easier to set boundaries and to also filter like who am I giving my time and attention to. To be more discerning, like somebody said before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned, you know, feeling silly, like feeling a sense of who you used to be, sort of a sensing that child that's been there all along, being able to come and play more on the surface. And it's actually where a lot of our power and wisdom is, I think, is in that younger energy. So that's really good to hear. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Arnie.
Hi.
Hello, welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much.
How are you doing today?
Good. Yeah, I'm about to start my 5th round of SBSM. I was trying to count back and see how many. I was starting to lose track because every time it comes around, I'm always doing it as an incredible experience. And I have to say, I came to it with actually being harmed by trauma work. Having a primal therapist who would, like, I'm your mother, hit me, this whole, just ways into force out some trauma that she expected. And because I couldn't, you know, couldn't feel anything, then I would fake it, and so perform for the therapist and give her what she wanted to hear, even remembering things that I didn't remember. And it was just a recreation of, of childhood, just having to be what somebody wanted me to be in order to please them. But this was this was just so painful because, eventually, yeah, you would get angry when you're beating tennis rackets against a couch and screaming, you're my mother, I hate you, and all this. I mean, yes, you're going to have some kind of a feeling. And then sometimes it would erupt into a huge, overwhelming emotion, but then no way to integrate it, no way to process it. So it would be forced back down again. And it left me in a state of depression and in freeze. And so I went on with my life from that, being in that state of functional freeze. That, Irene, she's so great at explaining it, but and you can function, and you're not feeling.
Yeah.
And, how do you feel when
That's, and I just want to highlight that for a moment because what you share is something that's not talked about nearly enough. How trauma therapy and trauma therapists, when they don't really know what they're doing, very often end up harming people and re-traumatizing them, and they end up worse off than they were before because it's so confrontational. And like you say, it's like there's this need to perform, and then you're just doing the same shit you did when you were a kid. So
Exactly.
yeah, I'm sorry you went through that, man. And it sounds like SBSM, you found your own way.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's what was just so amazing. A friend of mine that I communicate to, and also to actually try to recover from all of this, I went the route like you did, the hyper spiritual
Ah,
override route. So I
yes.
joined an ashram and became the whole the meditation, teacher and all of this, so it had all of this going on, and yet again, no feeling, no emotion. So all of that you've shared been so helpful about that, because that was another way that I chose to cope with not being able to feel, with all those buried feelings. Okay, well, I don't have to. I can just feel good. I can just,
I'll just transcend. Yeah.
transcend it all, and
Yeah.
I don't have to feel anything. And yet everything's falling apart, but it's all okay, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you feel? I mean, the simplicity of all this is just sort of beyond words. The first, the orienting, is my butt in the chair? Are my feet on the ground? Am I breathing? Am I here right now? The fact that I could even talk to you about all of this right now, it shows there's been tremendous social engagement that is more online now. That's because that wire was cut. That was phony. I had a persona, but it wasn't me.
Yeah.
And just the simplest idea of just coming back into the body and just holding and being with whatever is there, allowing it to come up, allowing even the freeze to be there. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, one day during the neurosensory exercises, a tear just came down my face like this. I'll never forget it. It was completely disembodied from a feeling, but the tear there, and then another one, and the body was starting to feel safe enough to actually have an authentic feeling, which then later, little by little, again, the whole titration thing, not forcing, which is what my whole thing was, get it out, move, come on, the towel thing that you do use, but she was using it and like, just go for it immediately. Come on, until you
Yeah.
feel something. You don't feel it, squeeze it harder.
Mm. Mm.
That whole just backing off, just being able to just be with
Yeah.
whatever was there. And then the feelings started to connect. They started to come out little by little. Every day there be in through all of the exercises, the later one, the voos and the sound exercise was particularly helpful for me, because I'm a children's magician. The only safety I could find as a kid was performing magic for
Ah,
kids. That was where I found that was my, nugget of safety, and it became the career and where I am free. But
yeah.
even as when I do my work in front of those kids. But at the same time, I did notice while I was doing the work, there was a part of me that was still locked up, because I share this in one of the things with you, that I would be sweating profusely
Wow.
during my shows, and I could never just couldn't stop it. I was great and they loved me, but I was just, exhausted. And because I was pushing against
Yeah.
the buried feelings in order to communicate.
Yeah.
So now things are, settled down quite a bit. And there's much more effortlessness in my,
Mm.
and much more fun. And I'm enjoying it. You see, the whole thing was, are they enjoying it? Are they laughing? Oh, I didn't. And then when something wouldn't work, I just beat myself up to a pulp, just, it all had to be externally focused, externally validation from the
Mm.
laughter of the audience, from the cheers of the audience, from the approval of the parents. It all goes way back. And so now it's relaxed, and I'm having so much fun as
Ah,
I'm doing my, shows and work. I've never actually realized I never really had fun, never felt that sense of fun, because I
wow.
wasn't feeling anything.
Wow.
And also that some of mentioned the anger work. I mean, it's so important. The fact that I just reframed in my head that this is life force energy. This is not bad, scary anger. This is every time it come up, my life force, and I can use it and channel it into that healthy sympathetic energy to get what has to be done, and then relax.
Amazing.
Not stay up here, not stay down there. So the program has just been remarkable, I have to say. So I'm so grateful to you.
That's so wonderful. Thank you. I'm grateful to you for doing it. And I'm so glad that you brought up the anger at the end there, because I was going to ask, given that you had these horrible experiences with being forced into confront, like being performative with anger, now it sounds like you're able to genuinely access that.
Genuinely access, because it comes up spontaneously. It's not as if I'm trying to make it happen. All of a sudden it'll come up, but instead of now pushing it down when it comes up, there's my life force.
Yeah.
Now I can express it in a way, and it can actually release, and I actually can have, I know what a release is. It's not just a, but again, it's organic. And then you get energy from it. You're not exhausted from it. Remember, I felt exhausted after those primal therapy sessions. Like I just wanted to fall. I was like, drained.
Yeah.
And that wasn't doing any good. So
beautiful, man. Beautiful. Thank you, Arnie, so much. I love your story.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, David Jones. Hello, hello.
Hello.
All right. Good to see you. I've seen you so much on the calls, and lovely to hear your voice now. Where are you in the world?
I live in Radium Hot Springs in British Columbia.
Oh, fantastic. You're a fellow BCer.
Yes, I am these days, yes.
So I know you've been involved with the program for a while. Tell us a bit about your journey.
So it's rather interesting to listen to everybody else, because there's little bits and pieces that everybody's sort of focused on that sort of like, well, that's part of my life and that's part of my life. But just to start, for all intents and purposes, my parents were both orphans. And growing up, emotions did not exist in my family. I only relatively recently realized that I had never seen a sense of affection between my parents. As a child, I was always trying to escape from the house, escape from the backyard, so they'd have to tie me up. And then at 5, exploring, I lifted a lid, which was a lid to a well. It pitched me down into the bottom of a well. And the fire department had to come and the lid closed behind me. So the fire department had to come and extract me. Found me dog paddling in the bottom. So that was the beginning of a number of sort of trauma events.
Yeah, I'll say.
By the age of 10, I recall to this day the decision that the world was screwed up and that I had to live in my head and ignore all of my feelings to be safe.
Smart choice at the time.
Through high school, and for most of my life, I've been a loner. Through high school, I was ostracized being the science nerd. So I kept to myself and did all my own things, so marched my own drum. But I had intense suicidal depression for most of my teenage years and into my early 20s.
Yeah.
The savior was discovered, and I was always enormous amounts of energy.
Yeah. And
so that outlet led to mountaineering. I've done that around the world for 60 years, sometimes pretty extreme. During some of those events, I would have what some might call mystical experiences. That's what kept me alive.
Yeah.
Halfway through a PhD, I had standing on the corner, and I realized a panic attack, and I was completely numb. I mean, that's a feeling, but couldn't feel a thing. I checked myself into a 6-week program at UBC called Day House. They couldn't break through my armoring. And at the end, on the sort of the release, I said publicly, only I could heal myself. And I look back on that and I realized how profound that was, even though I didn't really recognize it at the time.
Yeah.
I immediately started doing rolfing, and I could fall asleep while somebody had all their pressure on their elbows rolling down my back. I couldn't feel anything.
Yeah.
I then did a lot of rebirthing, about 30, 40 sessions of rebirthing. And then bits and pieces would come up over the years. Yeah, it's hard to say. But then, I sort of take a break and think, I've got to do something. And I would try something, and it's like, okay, that doesn't quite work. I make a little advance, or I do this workshop, or go whatever.
Yeah.
And then I guess I really started about seriously. I was married for a few years, but we split up amicably. But I realized that I have no idea how to love it. I don't know what love is. Not a clue. And about 6 years ago, I started to delve into this a lot, with going to various workshops. Did a lot of focusing, which I found really helpful.
Yep.
Covered somatic experiencing and did 40 sessions of that. And along the way, sort of started to emerge, connecting to my body in a very different way. I mean, in the mountains, I'm totally free.
Yeah.
I have unbelievable freedom in the mountains. I can go anywhere, and I'm totally at home. Put me in the city, and it's like hyper vigilant, people around me.
Yeah.
2's company, 3's a crowd.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, there was 2 or 3 things sort of came together. I did the Irene's movement workshop at UBC some years ago. And there was a person there that I think is also associated with SBM. And she showed me a book. She said, I might be interested in this. And that was John Prendergast's book, In Touch.
Yes.
And I went down to Esalen for a week with John and had experiences working with him. And that really helped me open up a little bit more the door. And then I went back to, well, who is this Irene person? And then that sort of got me more involved with SBSM. And along the way, I've done a whole bunch of other work. I've been doing parts work and stuff like that, which also I've found really helps me dig into the abandoned parts of me, even sort of as a fetus, let alone at points of birth.
Yes.
So I'm still not really terribly keen on being around people. I'm easier to do, and I can do it. And I have noticed, I've been surprised, I've actually talked to that person, whereas ordinarily I would have walked down the street or wouldn't even have seen them.
Yeah.
Following my impulses have been really important. For sometimes I'll be walking around doing something, I have an impulse, and I'll sit down. All of a sudden, my body will shake from top to bottom, or I'll find energy rolling up and down my back, or I'll be just rolling in tears. So that's been valuable. And so much more in touch with feelings. All of a sudden, it's like, there's some feeling there. Or I can simply sit with the feelings and be okay.
Wow, man.
So, and I'm much more playful even in the mountaineering community. I mean, I'm well known across Canada, but I can play. I can go out with my bright orange or a pink lycra tights and play on the rock, and I don't give a damn.
Love it, man.
So, I guess that's sort of in a nutshell where I've come from.
Well, it's an incredible journey. And what you mentioned about both your parents being orphans, as we've learned, being an orphan is one of the most profound wounds a person can experience, in terms of this early rupture. And if both your parents coming from that background, man, that's a doozy. So, I mean, what an incredible journey you've been on, from having that modeling to where you are now, being able to have these feelings and these experiences. That's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I found only after my mother died and my father had died previously, and it came right out of the blue from a strange situation, is that My maternal grandfather murdered his wife and then committed suicide when my mother was 2.5.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I realize that that trauma is carried right through into my life.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. The intergenerational thing is real.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah. Yep. Would you say, I'm just curious, since you've done parts work, this is something that I've explored in my work with people just privately and also for myself, is combining parts work with the somatic awareness. Is that something that's been useful for you?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Because like you find that part and it's like, oh, well, what's the somatic experience of that part? Right. And yeah,
And getting a sense of that part and what it's feeling and what it needs. And
yes.
like I was doing a little bit the other day, and it's like there's this little part that's rolled up in a ball, and it's got one finger stuck out, and you can touch the finger, and it gradually unfolds, and then its feet is cold, and you get these sort of feelings.
Yes.
And the body response.
Yes.
It's really astounding.
It is astounding. Amazing, man. Well, thanks so much for sharing, David. I sure appreciate it and appreciate you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Ian.
Hey, Seth.
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody that shared thus far. I'll say it's pretty remarkable to hear everyone's shared experiences. I've felt a lot of the same things that all of you have. So I think this is not only beneficial for the people that are listening, but for me as well. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, there's certainly we're a community, there's stuff that you can talk about with people who do this work that you can't really talk about with other people, so
Right.
it's wonderful to have a group of us together. Yeah. Yeah. So just, share a bit about, if you'd like, your experience in entering into this work and maybe what was happening for you before. And
Sure.
yeah.
So I'm from Utah, so United States, that's where I come from. So in summary, I guess like the beginning was I've always been a sick kid, always dealt with illness, always just kind of had that mindset that something is wrong. At a very young age, at 2 weeks old, I got chicken pox. At 8 years, I got shingles, which is generally like an older person's illness. So that's been a through line through a significant part of my life. I would say the strongest piece of trauma that I faced. So my dad died by suicide at the age of 13. So that was really, really heavy shock trauma at a formative part of life, for the brain, emotion, all of those things. And so that's really where I think that tremendous amount of freeze really first set in. And having no real awareness. I mean, the brain isn't even really formed. So not having any awareness of what that meant and how that would affect my life, went through a significant portion of that. So I'm 33 now, just being in a freeze state. And so really a couple of things happened that I think really brought that to my awareness. COVID was a big one. I was in a relationship, moved in together with someone that was, immunocompromised. So it was about a year's worth of not leaving the house. So that was difficult, but I think it really forced me to confront a lot of those emotions. There was really no way to run away from them any longer.
Right.
And so it really bottled up. It ended up ending, but it was really helpful for me to understand and really come to terms with those emotions. Another piece of that following that was I actually did therapeutic ketamine sessions, which was life-changing for me. Really unlocked a lot of things that were repressed, as you could probably imagine. And in that part of the journey, YouTube is a big friend of mine. I use it for everything learning. And I remember having one day thinking, why haven't I really explored YouTube to search, for trauma? And so I remember the keywords I searched: trauma, chronic pain, because I also deal with a lot of chronic pain, particularly on my left side, of just enormous amount of injuries on my left side. And so I remember finding Irene. And this is after, doing some parts work and lots of therapy and lots of other modalities, like a lot of other people have expressed here. But I remember just spending an entire day, probably 8 hours straight, of just watching everything, because I'd never felt so understood. I'd never felt so like something really resonated, like this is exactly what I've experienced.
Yeah.
And so following that tremendous amount of just like intake of information, it was like, okay, now I need to take this and apply it. So I immediately signed up for SBSM. I didn't even do the 21-day. I just knew that it was for me. And so I signed up for SBSM. So this time upcoming will be my third time through. I think it's important to illustrate that I haven't made it all the way through the content. Like a lot of other people have said, like I had to learn how to titrate. It's funny, in one of your Q&A sessions, I actually posed a question of, how do I build enough capacity to tackle this content? And Irene actually made a really good comment that will stick with me forever. And she was like, pay attention to the language that you use. Like tackle is such a, like, put your head against it, like go in, like fight, just like push through, like, collegiate type of mindset. And that really shifted things for me, and that's where I was like, okay, I'll slow down. Like, I don't need to finish the content. I don't need to get through. I need to get as far as my body will allow me to go.
Yeah.
And so, and that's where it leaves me now, is coming up on this third time of, just kind of integrating and finding ways every single day. This has allowed me to be more open. I'm a lot like you, Seth. I've lived alone for 10 years now. Slowly working my way out of that. I got a cat finally after a number of
All right.
Yeah. So that's been good, to feel energy that's not just my own, and opening myself up to that space. So, that kind of puts me where I'm at now, but I'm so grateful to all of you, and Seth, to you, and to Irene, and for this work. It's been life-saving for me. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Ian. And, I think would you say that it took you a couple rounds just to discover what your pace was?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's so important for me. It's like that first time I was so used to, programs and school and all of these things. And like, oh, I'm falling behind if I don't watch it live. And if I'm not participating live, then what's the point? I'm kind of an all or nothing person. And so it was, how do I find a way of being okay with that? Like just looking at it and without any judgment. And so in subsequent times, I've really identified that, I will go at the pace that my body will allow, and it's okay. And I can't express enough the gratitude I have for the program being lifelong. You sign up for the program and you can engage whenever you feel like you need to, when you don't have the capacity. And that alone has been so helpful for me, because I know each time I don't have to go all the way through it this time. There's next time, there's all this time in between. So yes, very much so.
Awesome. Fantastic, man. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your share.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Kris, are you still with us here?
Yes. Hey, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm calling from Seattle, Washington, which I think is not too far from you. Yep.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate the opportunity today to meet. I actually haven't done a panel before, so this is exciting to kind of hear a little bit stories of what other people have gone through. My journey started in 2018. I had a panic attack that was centered around getting rejected by somebody I was pursuing in a romantic capacity. And I had been rejected before, but in this instance, it was somebody that I had really gotten close to and felt a very strong connection. And I was absolutely shocked when the response came back as a no. And it just really devastated my life. I went from what I would call a very high functioning adult to just the next day, instantaneously, just my world had come crumbling down. I felt this very strong sensation of worthlessness and helplessness, despair, and it just, I mean, I knew rejection could could sting, but this was just way above and beyond anything I'd really experienced. I had gotten close before in my early 20s, and I did see a therapist at that time, and none of this work, I don't think, really was out there. So it was really just a general therapist that I saw, and it took me about 3 years to get over it. And then fast forward to 2018, and it happened again, and I was shocked to be, you know, that old and have it happen again, and it was really impacting my ability to work at my job, and which only compounded the panic.
Yeah.
And I was working as an engineer, and I have degrees in engineering, and I was good at problem solving, so I kind of pulled on that toolkit to get to work on the problem, and got on the internet, and I very quickly learned about attachment theory and how people attach to other people. I learned, if you know anything about attachment theory, I fit in the category of fearful avoidant, which might not be a big shock. And I learned that I had, you know, and fearful avoidant is a combination of avoiding connection, which I'd done very well. I had figured out through, you know, kind of researching it, that I had a lot of avoidant behaviors. But as an avoidant, I still craved connection. So when I found somebody that I really wanted, I would pull that person in, and all of a sudden I would flip to an anxious attachment style. And we had played out what was classically apparently known as the anxious avoidant cycle, and that's exactly, as soon as I read about that, I felt so validated. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what happened. That led me to childhood trauma therapy. I met with somebody in a group capacity, an individual who did cognitive behavioral therapy using an internal family systems model. And for a long time, or for a couple of years, we went through this whole root canal of cause and effect of different things that happened in my childhood to, you know, what had led to attachment style, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was with him for a while, and it was just an absolute wealth of knowledge. And I dove face first doing genograms and cause and effect and all this other stuff, and it was just great, and I really loved it. But I got to the point where I was like, I think I now know everything. I had a full cause and effect diagram. I knew all the stories from childhood. I knew why I was triggered in the present, and I wasn't feeling any better. I could get triggered and then reason out why I was triggered, but I wasn't feeling better. So I got back on the internet and started researching, and that's where I started learning about PTSD and complex PTSD, and then EMDR. And then that led me to an EMDR therapist and I knew going in that EMDR was more tuned to single event trauma.
Yeah.
And sort of requires this frame of reference of what grounding is in order for it to be successful, which I had none of that. But it seemed to be the only game in town at the time through my limited research. And I worked with this woman, and we did exactly 8 seconds of EMDR. What it did was it introduced me to the idea that emotions are sets of body sensations. I had no idea that was the case.
Right.
And then I went down in this whole exercise of learning what emotions are. I had an emotion wheel. As I got triggered, I would say, I am this emotion, right? So I just started practicing that of naming and describing, I think the tool was called. And then as I started going deeper with the body and doing more research, I came across a lot out there. I heard Rolfing, I heard Trey out there. These things are all things like a kid of mine I heard. Those are all things I saw. But there were 3 people I thought resonated the most with me. One was certainly Irene, Peter Levine, and then a name I haven't heard yet. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Nina Garadia. She's out of Florida, does some similar work with somatic experiencing, and her YouTube content I found to be helpful. And I signed up for Irene's the 21-day nervous system. I went through that, and I gotta be honest, I didn't know how to use it.
Yeah.
But she had so much free content. And I had, I forgot to mention, but I was introduced to polyvagal. I did a deep dive on polyvagal and the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic, and the biology of how a child grows up and there's attunement through feedback, all that, right? So, okay, I get how this happened. But how do I really work with it? And I felt like I didn't really understand Irene's stuff at first. So I sort of put it aside, but at the same time, there was enough free content. She explained the heck out of everything. And I felt like I just knew I would be coming back to it at some point. And from there, what I did is I went through this long period of really doing just triggering work. So despite the fact I got my attachment style, I still had toxic behaviors towards other people. Sure. I could be abusive. I could yell at people at work. I could get fired up. And I felt like I really needed to kind of work with that. So I had these 6 threads. I won't go through them, but in my head of these are the 6 things that trigger me the most. And here's the behavior responses that I have. And I just got practice trying to emote and finish different trauma responses of unfinished business that I had from childhood. In other words, I would think of a traumatic experience, whether I was being bullied or something with my parents, whatever, and I would just reenact it out and get upset and mad and do kick and shadow boxing. And I know Irene had the one with the working with anger and the towel. I love that exercise. I was down at the park and I would just be tugging on these trees, trying to rip them out, and God, it felt so good. And that really allowed me to dissociate a lot less and get through triggers a lot more. And I returned to Irene's work. I signed up for SBSM last year in the winter. I think you guys started in February. And I couldn't really keep pace with it. I was doing kind of the working with the different parts. And I was like, I think I know what's going on here. I feel like she's trying to get me to safety, to grounding, right? By working with the Feldenkrais model and trying to get that natural sprouting of a child that they do through movement. And what I found, and I think somebody said earlier, talking about men in particular, about, emotions aren't at the forefront. And I very much resonated with that. And what I found for me is that I had an awful lot of stuck trauma, old trauma that I needed to get out before I could really have a shot at getting grounded. So I spent a long cycle of a lot of months just doing more of the kickboxing or whatever things to just emote and get used to reenacting that. And I want to go back to, I know it's about to start up again. I saw the email. I want to try it again and see if I can get that last piece of traction and kind of come out and be able to do things like be silly more and more relaxed, that kind of thing. So I still think got more to go on my journey. And I've kind of gone back and forth with different modalities and pulling different things together. But I do absolutely believe in this work. I think for me, it's just been I've had a little bit extra freeze that I had to punch through, I think, for me before I can, really, I think, get the full benefit. But I'm all in, and I want to try it again and see how it goes.
Awesome, man. I mean, what you describe is really great because it highlights how there are a lot of things that are useful. Right? There is, in the world of healing and discovering ourselves and processing trauma, there's all sorts of things that are useful. And it can be really helpful sometimes to start with understanding, like you to describe with understanding your attachment style and like making sense and like understanding these are the emotions. And like, I think there's no wrong way in. It's just finding our way through these layers and these different tools. And you're right that what Irene offers and what we do in SBSM, a lot of it is very subtle, and like it can take a while to sort of like understand like what the heck is this doing, right? Like and I think that's totally great that you're able to realize that for you need more big stuff first to sort of like get these energies moving. So I'll be really curious to see what this next round is like for you. Let us know, of course, in the forum and stuff, like what's happening for you as you go into it this round. It'll be really cool to see how it's different this time.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kris, so much. All right, y'all. Well, I think that is everyone, and we are at an hour and a half. So thank you all so very much for being here. I think this was very, very cool to hear from the men, and I hope that we do this again. And I just, yeah, can't thank you enough, each and every one of you, for putting in the time and doing the work and finding your own way, into it and through it. There's no one journey, right? It's like we have commonalities, and shared things. It's like, oh yeah, I went through that, but we also all have our own sort of pathway through this. And it's really wonderful to hear about all of yours. So thank you once again for being here, and we will wrap this up. And I will look forward to seeing you all inside SBSM. So farewell. Thank you so much. We'll see you.
Thanks all. Thanks,
Thanks,
Seth.
Seth. Awesome.
Thank you.
It's a
Thank you.
big onion, you know.
It sure is a big onion. Yeah. All right. All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye bye.